The machine died at 2:47 a.m. Bukowski knew the exact time because he'd been staring at the clock for the past hour, waiting for the words to come. And when they finally did, when that rare clarity arrived like an unexpected guest, the IBM gave one last metallic cough and went silent. He hit the keys. Nothing. Hit them harder. Still nothing. The ribbon was fine, the paper loaded, but something in the guts of the machine had surrendered. Son of a bitch. He sat there in his underwear, cigarette burning between his fingers, the unwritten lines already starting to dissolve in his head like sugar in hot water. This always happened. The moment you grabbed hold of something real, the universe found a way to slap it out of your hands. The words were about a woman he'd seen at the track that afternoon. Not beautiful, not in any conventional way, but something in how she'd torn up her losing tickets, methodical, almost tender, had struck him. There was a poem in that gesture, or maybe a story. He didn't know yet, but it was there, complete and perfect in his mind, and it was already starting to fade. If you know that feeling, that panic when something worth saying starts slipping away, then you understand why what happened next wasn't really a choice. Hit that subscribe button if stories like this speak to you. We'll be here, talking about the small disasters that make us human. Bukowski stood up, walked to the window. His apartment looked out onto a courtyard, and across the way he could see lights still on in a few windows. Normal people, asleep or almost there. He envied them sometimes, the ones who could just turn off their brains and sleep. But tonight he hated them too, a little, for not understanding what it was like to have something clawing to get out. He knew one of those lit windows belonged to the woman in 4B. He'd seen her around, late 20s, dark hair usually in a ponytail, always carrying a canvas bag full of books. She worked at the library downtown, he thought. Or maybe she was a student. He'd never asked. They'd exchanged exactly 3 conversations, each consisting of no more than 6 words. Morning. Hot today. Elevator's broken again. But he'd noticed the typewriter. 2 weeks ago, passing her open door while she was moving furniture, he'd seen it on a desk by her window. A portable Olivetti, green. He remembered thinking it was a pretentious color for a typewriter. Now that green Olivetti was his only hope. He looked down at himself. Underwear, unwashed. He smelled like cigarettes and the Chinese food he'd eaten for dinner 8 hours ago. His hair was doing whatever it did when he ran his hands through it too many times. There was a coffee stain on his undershirt. Fuck it. He pulled on the pants he'd thrown over the chair, didn't bother with a shirt, and walked out into the hallway. The building was quiet, except for the sound of someone's TV playing through thin walls. He stood in front of 4B for a moment, trying to figure out what the hell he was going to say. Then he knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, harder. The door opened 6 inches, stopped by a chain. Her face appeared in the gap, eyes adjusting to see who was knocking at. He checked his watch. 2:53 a.m. Mr. Bukowski? Yeah. Listen. Are you all right? My typewriter died. She blinked. Your what? Typewriter. The thing you write with. Mine's dead and I need to write something right now. Tonight. I saw you have one. She stared at him like he'd just told her his cat was on fire. It's 3 in the morning. 2:53. That's not better. Look, I know how this sounds, but I've got something I need to get down, and if I don't do it now, it's gone. You understand? It'll be gone. She studied him through the crack in the door. He could see she was wearing an oversized sweater, probably sleeping in it. There were books stacked on the table behind her. One of them was open, face down. She'd been reading. You're drunk, she said. I'm not drunk. I've been trying to write for 5 hours. I'm stone sober and desperate. Those aren't very different states for you, I imagine. He almost laughed. Fair enough. She closed the door. For a moment he thought that was it. Conversation over. Go home, old man. But then he heard the chain sliding and the door opened wider. One condition, she said. Name it. You sit at my kitchen table and write whatever you need to write. But I read it when you're done, all of it, and you tell me honestly if it's any good. He frowned. What? I write too. Have been for 2 years. Can't tell if anything I do is worth a damn. Everyone I show it to says it's nice, which means nothing. You're a published writer. You'll tell me the truth. How do you know I will? Because you look like someone who can't help it. They stood there, him in the hallway in his wrinkled pants, her in the doorway in her sweater. The building's heating system clanked somewhere in the walls. Deal, he said. She stepped aside and let him in. The apartment was smaller than his, but cleaner, significantly cleaner. Books everywhere, like his place, but organized on actual shelves instead of piled on every available surface. A print of Hopper's Nighthawks on one wall. The kitchen table was covered in papers, all of them covered in handwriting. She swept them into a stack and set them aside. The Olivetti sat on a small desk by the window, next to a coffee mug and an ashtray, with 2 cigarette butts in it. She picked it up and brought it to the kitchen table, set it down in front of the chair. Paper's already in it, she said. I was using it earlier. What's your name? He asked suddenly. Claire. How long have you lived here, Claire? 8 months. And you know who I am. Saw your name on some mail once. Looked you up at the library, read your stuff. She pulled out a chair on the opposite side of the table and sat down. Some of it's good. Some of it's trying too. Hard. He sat down, put his hands on the keys. They felt different from his IBM. Lighter, more responsive. The paper in the roller was cheap, the kind that would yellow in a few months. But it would do. You mind if I make coffee? She asked. It's your place. She got up and moved to the small kitchen counter. He heard her filling a pot with water, the click of the stove igniting. Then he stopped paying attention to anything except the words. They came slowly at first. The woman at the track tearing up her tickets. But as he wrote, she changed. She became someone else, or maybe several people, compressed into one. The way fiction worked sometimes, taking pieces of real life and rearranging them until they were truer than the truth. Claire put a cup of coffee next to him. He nodded without looking up. The apartment was quiet except for the clacking of the Olivetti and the occasional sound of her turning pages as she went back to her book. He wrote about the woman at the track, but also about loss in general. How we keep betting on things we know are bad odds. How we tear up the evidence of our failures with such care, such ritual. How we come back the next day and do it all over again. 20 minutes in, he realized this wasn't a poem. It was a story. The distinction mattered less than people thought. But it mattered. 40 minutes in, the woman at the track had a name, Helen, and a husband who left her for someone younger, and a system for picking horses that made no sense to anyone including herself. She won occasionally, enough to keep coming back. But that wasn't why she came. She came because the track was the only place where losing felt honest. Where are you listening from? I want to know. Drop it in the comments and give this story a rating so far, 0 to 10. Does it land, or am I just talking to myself here? At the 1 hour mark, he pulled the last page from the typewriter. His coffee was cold. Claire had made herself a cup too and was still reading, though she'd glanced up at him a few times. Done, he said. She closed her book. That was fast. Had it in my head already. Just needed to get it out before it rotted. He handed her the stack of pages, 11 of them, single-spaced. She took them and started reading. He lit a cigarette, walked to her window, looked out at the courtyard. The same lights were still on. Somewhere, a siren passed in the distance. He watched her reflection in the window glass as she read. Her face didn't give anything away. She was a careful reader, he could tell. Didn't rush, didn't skip. When she finished a page, She set it face down on the table before starting the next. When she got to the end, she set the last page down and sat back in her chair. "Well?" he asked, still facing the window. "It's good. The part about her system for picking horses, the way she chooses based on the names reminding her of things she's lost, that's good. The ending's weak, though." He turned around. "Weak how?" "You have her win on the last race. It's too neat. She should lose again. The whole story is about how she keeps coming back even though she loses, right? So let her lose. Let her tear up those tickets the same way. That's the truth of it." He stubbed out his cigarette in her ashtray. She was right. He'd gone soft at the end, given Helen a small victory because he'd felt sorry for her. But Claire was right. Helen didn't need victory. She needed consistency in her losses. "Yeah," he said. "You're right. I'll fix it. Can I keep these? I want to read it again tomorrow when my brain's working better." "Sure." She stood up, walked to the stack of papers she'd swept aside earlier, picked up about 30 pages and handed them to him. "Your turn," she said. He looked at the pages. Her handwriting was small, precise. The title at the top of the first page? "The Water Stain." "I'll read it tonight," he said. "Tell me the truth. Don't be nice." "I don't know how to be nice about writing." "Good." He headed for the door, the borrowed pages in one hand. At the threshold, he stopped. "Thanks for the typewriter." "Thanks for reading," she said. Then, as he was stepping into the hall, "Mr. Bukowski?" "Yeah." "Next time your machine breaks, knock earlier. 3 a.m. is ridiculous." He almost smiled. "I'll try." Back in his apartment, he read her story. It was about a woman who kept seeing a stain on her ceiling grow larger each day, and how she became convinced it was some kind of message or sign, until finally, calling a plumber who told her the tenant above her had been dead for 3 days, and the stain was from the body. The prose was clean. Too clean, maybe. She was capable but careful, writing the way people do when they're afraid of making mistakes. The story itself was decent. The premise was morbid enough to work. But she'd hedged all the dark parts. When she described the stain, she used safe words. Unsettling, troubling. She needed to use the words that actually fit. Obscene, rotting. He found a pencil and started marking up the margins. Not gentle corrections, but the truth she'd asked for. By the time he finished, her pages looked like a battlefield. At 5:30 a.m., he finally went to bed, the pages stacked neatly on his table, ready to return. 2 days later, he knocked on her door at 7 p.m. She answered in jeans and a t-shirt, hair wet like she'd just showered. "Readable hour this time," she said. "I'm learning." He handed her the marked-up pages. She flipped through them, seeing the notes everywhere. For a second, he thought maybe he'd gone too far. But then she looked up and her eyes were bright. "This is useful," she said. "You asked for truth." "I did." She set the pages on her table. "You want coffee? Real coffee, not the instant shit." "Sure." He sat down while she made it. The Olivetti was back on the desk by the window. His story about Helen was there too, he noticed, with pencil marks of her own in the margins. She brought 2 cups and sat down across from him, the same positions as 3 nights before. "I fixed the ending," he said. "Helen loses, tears up the tickets, puts them in her purse with all the others, goes home. Better?" "Yeah, better." They drank their coffee. Outside, someone's radio was playing something with too much saxophone. "Why do you write?" she asked suddenly. He thought about giving her the easy answer, the one about needing to, about having no choice. But she'd given him her work to tear apart. She deserved better than easy answers. Because I don't know how to live any other way, he said. Every job I've had, every relationship, every moment I'm not writing feels like I'm pretending to be someone else. Some acceptable version of a human being. When I write, I don't have to pretend. I can be as ugly and honest as I want. It's the only time I feel like myself. She nodded slowly. That's it. That's exactly it. Why do you write? Same reason. Except I'm still trying to figure out what my honest voice sounds like. I keep writing what I think I'm supposed to write, what sounds like literature. She gestured at her marked-up pages. That's why I needed you to be brutal. I need to know what's real and what's performance. Most of what you wrote is performance, he said. But there's real stuff in there. The part about her pressing her hand against the stain, feeling how cold it is. That's real. The part about the neighbor's dog barking at her door every morning after. Real. Everything else is you trying to sound like a writer instead of being one. She didn't look hurt. She looked relieved. So, what do I do? Stop trying to write like anyone else. Write like you're alone in a room and nobody will ever read it. Write the worst, most embarrassing, most truthful thing you can. Then maybe you'll find something worth keeping. They talked for another hour. About writing, about the books they loved and hated, about living in LA, about the track, about how everyone they knew seemed to be faking their way through life except the people who'd stopped pretending they had it together. At some point, she got up and pulled a bottle of wine from her cabinet. Not the cheap stuff, something actual with a cork. They drank it from coffee mugs because she didn't have wine glasses. I saw you once, she said, at a reading, about 6 months ago before I moved here. You were drunk and you called someone in the audience an idiot for asking why you didn't write happy poems. What did I say? You said, why would I? The world's already full of lies. He didn't remember that reading specifically, but it sounded like him. Still think I'm worth reading? More than before, honestly. At least you're consistent. He laughed. Actually laughed, which didn't happen often. Around 10 p.m. he stood to leave. She walked him to the door. Same deal still stands, she said. You need the typewriter, knock, but only after 10 a.m. on weekdays. Deal. And I keep writing, you keep reading? If you want the truth, yeah. If you want someone to tell you it's good when it's not, find someone else. I want the truth. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from. And rate this one, 0 to 10. Does this story work for you? Or should I have quit while I was ahead? The next week, they fell into a rhythm without discussing it. He'd knock on her door every few days with something he'd written. She'd give it to him straight. What worked? What was self-indulgent? What was him trying to be Bukowski instead of being himself? Sometimes her notes stung, but they were always right. She'd hand him her work too. Stories about women working retail jobs and hating every customer. Stories about inherited furniture and what it meant. Stories about women who wanted to burn down their own lives, but couldn't afford to. The more she wrote, the less she performed. Her voice started emerging, sharper than he'd expected, funnier, meaner. This is good, he told her once, holding up a story about a woman stealing from the library donation box. Good enough? Good enough. Sometimes they just drank coffee and complained about other writers. She hated the ones who workshopped everything to death. He hated the ones who treated writing like a career ladder. They both hated anyone who described their work as exploring themes. One night she asked him about his ex-wives. He told her about the first one, who'd married him when he was a post office clerk and left when she realized he was never going to be more than that. About the second one, Who'd like the idea of being married to a writer more than the reality of living with one? You ever want to try again? She asked. Marriage? Christ, no, I'm too old and too selfish. What about you? Never tried the first time. Everyone I've dated wants me to be quieter, wants me to take up less space. She refilled her coffee mug. I'm not good at being small. Good. The world's got enough small people already. They talked about families. She'd moved to LA from Boston to get away from hers. Mother who thought she should be married by now. Father who thought her writing was a waste of time. He told her about his father, the beatings, how he'd spent his whole life trying not to become that man, and still caught himself being cruel for no reason sometimes. But you notice it, she said. That counts. Does it? More than you'd think. 3 weeks into their arrangement, his typewriter was still broken. He could afford to fix it or buy another one, but he hadn't. He kept using hers, kept knocking on her door when he had something that needed to get out. She never asked why he didn't fix his own machine. He never explained. One Thursday night, he showed up at her door with a bottle of whiskey instead of pages. No work tonight? She asked. Didn't feel like writing, felt like drinking. Fair enough. They drank the whiskey and talked about everything except writing. She told him about working at the library, about the regular who came in every day to read the same book in the same chair, about the kid who tried to steal poetry books because he couldn't afford to buy them, and she'd let him. He told her about the track, about the regular bettors who had systems that made no sense but followed them religiously, about the old drunk who'd once told him, it's not about winning, it's about having a reason to care about something. Is that why you come back to the track? She asked. Maybe. Or maybe I just like watching people lose, honestly. She laughed. That's dark. But true. Around midnight, drunk enough to be honest, she said, Can I ask you something? Yeah. Why haven't you fixed your typewriter? He looked at his glass. The whiskey was cheap, but it did the job. Because then I'd have to stop knocking on your door. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you could still knock, with or without the excuse. Could I? Yeah, you could. They sat there, the city humming outside her window. He thought about all the people he'd known who tried to get close to him. The ones who wanted him to be softer, easier, less of whatever he was. The ones who wanted the poet, but not the drunk. The woman on the page, but not the man in the room. Claire had never asked him to be different. She just asked him to be honest. I'll fix the machine, he said finally. Okay. But I'll still knock. Okay. He stood up to leave. At the door, she said his name. When he turned, she was holding the whiskey bottle. Take it with you. I don't need the whole thing. He took it. Thanks for the typewriter, all those times. Thanks for the truth, all those times. Walking back to his apartment, bottle in hand, he thought about the woman at the track. Helen. The one who kept betting on horses whose names reminded her of things she'd lost, how she'd needed that ritual, that repeated failure, because it was the only honest thing in her life. Maybe we all needed rituals like that. Maybe his was knocking on Claire's door with pages that needed truth. Maybe hers was opening it, knowing he'd tear apart whatever she handed him. He got back to his apartment and sat down at the broken IBM. Hit the keys a few times, just to confirm it was still dead. Then he found the phone number for the repair shop and left it on the table where he'd see it tomorrow. But first, he took out a fresh sheet of paper and started writing by hand. A story about a man who borrowed his neighbor's typewriter and found out he'd been borrowing it longer than he needed to. About how sometimes We need excuses to connect with people, because admitting we need them is too hard. About how the best relationships happen by accident, in the middle of the night, over broken machines and honest criticism. He wrote until dawn, the words coming easier than they had in weeks. The next day, he got his typewriter fixed. Cost him $60 and they had to order a part. Took 3 days. During those 3 days, he kept using Claire's Olivetti. She never mentioned that his machine would be working again soon. He never mentioned that he already knew. On Saturday, when he picked up the IBM from the repair shop, it sat on his desk for 2 hours before he touched it. He stared at it like it was something foreign. Then he loaded paper, adjusted the margins, and wrote. The familiar keys felt wrong under his fingers, too heavy, too mechanical. He missed the light touch of the Olivetti, the way it responded faster than his IBM ever had. But more than that, he missed the ritual of walking down the hall, of knocking, of her opening the door already knowing why he was there. He wrote 3 pages and hated all of them. At 7 p.m. he knocked on Claire's door. She answered in a paint-stained shirt, hair tied back. "Machine's fixed," he said. "I figured. Came to return this." He held up the story he'd written by hand. "Also to see if you wanted to grab dinner." She looked at the pages, then at him. "Like a date?" "Like 2 people who write and drink eating food together. That's basically a date." "Then yeah, like a date." She smiled. Not the careful smile she'd given him those first times. A real one. "Give me 10 minutes to change." They went to a diner on Santa Monica Boulevard that stayed open until 2 a.m. Sat in a booth with cracked vinyl seats and ordered coffee and eggs, even though it was evening. The waitress didn't care. She looked like she'd stopped caring about anything years ago. Claire read his story while they waited for food, the one about the man and the typewriter. When she finished, she set it down and looked at him. "This is good. Really good. But the ending's too neat." "How so?" He shouldn't tell her it's a date. He should just keep knocking on her door. Keep using her typewriter, even though his works. And she should know and not say anything. That's more honest. He thought about it. She was right. The honesty wasn't in the declaration. It was in the repeated action, the ritual, the unspoken understanding. "I'll fix it," he said. The food came. They ate and talked about other things. About the city, about the people at the library, about the drunk at the track who'd fallen asleep on the bench and had to be woken up by security. "You're going to keep knocking on my door," she said, not a question. "If you'll keep opening it." "I will. But we're splitting a typewriter ribbon fund." "Deal." They stayed at the diner until midnight, drinking bad coffee and talking about everything and nothing. When they finally left, he walked her back to the building, stood in the hallway between their apartments. "You want to come in?" she asked. "I've got more of that wine." "Yeah, I'd like that." "So tell me where you're listening from. Drop it in the comments. And give this one a rating, 0 to 10. Did it work, or did I mess it up trying too hard? I need to know." Inside her apartment, she poured 2 glasses while he sat at the kitchen table. The Olivetti was still by the window, silhouetted against the lights of the courtyard. His story about Helen was still there too, pinned to the wall next to her desk. "You kept it?" he asked. "It's good. Reminds me that losing, honestly, is better than winning fake." She handed him a glass and sat down. They drank without talking for a while, comfortable in the silence. "So what happens now?" she asked eventually. "What do you mean?" "With this, us, whatever this is." He looked at his wine. Red cheap, but better than drinking alone. I don't know. I'm not good at this part. The part where things become defined. I'm better at the part where things just are. That's not very reassuring. No, it's not. But it's honest. She nodded slowly. Okay. Then we let things be what they are. You keep knocking. I keep opening the door. We keep tearing apart each other's work. We see what happens. No promises, he said. No promises, she agreed. They finished the bottle. Around 2 a.m. he stood to leave. I should go. You should. But he didn't move. Neither did she. Unless, she said. Unless what? Unless you want to stay. Use the typewriter some more. I'll read while you write. He thought about his apartment across the hall, the fixed IBM waiting on his desk, the silence, the usual routine of writing and drinking alone. Then he thought about this. Claire reading while he wrote, the sound of pages turning, the presence of another person who understood that writing wasn't about having something to say, but about needing to say anything at all. Yeah, he said, I'll stay. She pulled out the Olivetti, set it on the kitchen table. He loaded fresh paper while she settled into the chair across from him with a book. The apartment was quiet, except for the heating system and the distant sound of traffic. He started writing. Not about anything specific, just words, sentences, the rhythm of it, the clacking of keys. Claire turned pages, occasionally looked up at him, smiled slightly, went back to her book. This was it, he thought. This was the thing people spent their whole lives looking for and mostly never found. Not romance, not in the traditional sense. But this. Someone who lets you be yourself without asking for explanations. Someone who understood that the work came first and didn't resent it. Someone who could sit in the same room and exist parallel to you without demanding you change shape. He wrote about that. About parallel existence. About how rare it was to find someone whose strangeness matched your own. How most people wanted you to be less strange, less difficult, less yourself. But occasionally, you found someone who looked at your strangeness and said, yes, that works, I'll take that. At 4 a.m., he pulled the last page from the typewriter. 10 pages. Not a story, not exactly. More like a meditation. But it was honest. Done? Claire asked, looking up from her book. Yeah. Want me to read it? Tomorrow, when your brain works. Okay. She stood, stretched. I'm going to bed. You can stay if you want. Couch is decent. Or you can go back to your place, whatever. I'll stay. She brought him a blanket and a pillow. See you in the morning. Yeah. He lay on her couch, listening to her move around in the bedroom, water running, the click of a light turning off. Then silence. He should have felt strange, lying on the couch of a woman he'd known for less than a month. Should have felt like he was intruding or overstepping. But he didn't. He felt exactly where he was supposed to be. In the morning, he woke to the smell of coffee. Claire was already up, sitting at the kitchen table in an old t-shirt, reading what he'd written during the night. The pages were spread out in front of her. She had a pencil in her hand, but hadn't marked anything yet. He sat up, rubbed his face. Any good? She looked at him over the pages. It's honest. That's better than good. But nothing. It's good. Keep it. He poured himself coffee, sat down across from her. Outside the window, the courtyard was filling with morning light. Someone was walking a dog. Someone else was getting into a car, headed to whatever job they hated. I kept thinking last night, she said, about Helen, about how she needed that ritual of losing. And I wondered if we're the same, if we need these rituals to make sense of things. Probably. Is that sad? Maybe. But it's true. She handed him back his pages. What are you going to do with this? I don't know. Send it somewhere. Probably. Get rejected. Send it somewhere else. That's the ritual. Yeah. They drank their coffee. The building was waking up around them. Footsteps in the hallway, pipes creaking, someone's radio playing the news. You should probably go home, she said. Put on clean clothes. Shower. Probably. But he didn't move. Neither did she. Finally, he stood, gathered his pages. Thanks for letting me stay. Thanks for staying. At her door, he stopped. Same time tonight? You mean, are you coming back to write while I raid and pretend I'm not watching you? Yeah, that. She smiled. Yeah, same time. He walked across the hall to his apartment. The IBM was still on his desk, clean and functional and ready. He sat down, loaded paper, positioned his fingers on the keys. Then he stood up and walked back to Claire's door. She opened it, not surprised. Forget something. Can I borrow the typewriter again? She laughed. Actually laughed. The kind that wasn't polite or careful but real. Yeah, you can borrow the typewriter. And that's how it went. For weeks, months. He'd knock, she'd open the door. He'd write while she read. They'd drink coffee or wine or whiskey. They'd tear apart each other's work with surgical precision. They'd talk about everything and nothing. Some nights, he'd stay on her couch. Some nights, he'd go back to his place. But always, he'd come back. Always, she'd let him in. The IBM sat on his desk, unused. He told himself he'd start using it again eventually. But he never did. Because the truth wasn't in the machine. The truth was in the ritual, in the knocking and the opening, in the pages passed back and forth, in the brutal honesty that most people couldn't handle, but they gave each other freely. One night, 6 months into their routine, she asked him, "Are we together?" "I don't know. Are we?" "I think so. But not in any way that makes sense to other people." "Good. I don't care what makes sense to other people." "Me neither." They kept writing, kept reading each other's work, kept staying up until dawn talking about books and life and the small disasters that made them human. Her stories got better, sharper, more honest. She sold one to a journal he respected, then another. Started getting rejection letters that said, "Not quite right for us, but please send more," instead of form letters. His work changed too, got quieter, more focused, less performance. He wrote about ordinary things, diners, libraries, borrowed typewriters, and found more truth there than in all the grand gestures he'd written about before. One morning, after he'd fallen asleep on her couch again, she woke him up with coffee and pages. "I wrote something," she said. "About us. Want to read it?" He sat up, took the pages. It was a story about two writers who found each other by accident, who created their own ritual of truth-telling, who stayed together not because it was easy, but because it was honest. When he finished reading, he looked at her. "It's good, really good. But, no but, it's good." She smiled. "You're getting soft in your old age. Maybe. Or maybe you're just getting better." They drank their coffee. Outside, the city was waking up to another day of traffic and work and pretending. "You should send this somewhere," he said, holding up her pages. "I will, after you mark it up." "Don't need to. It's ready." She looked at him like he'd said something impossible. "Really?" "Really." So she sent it. 3 weeks later, it sold. Her first real sale, to a journal that paid actual money. They celebrated with cheap wine and cheaper Chinese food, eating it straight from the containers at her kitchen table while the Olivetti sat silent by the window. "What do we do now?" she asked. "What do you mean?" "I sold a story. You're still writing good work. We're both doing okay. What happens when things are actually okay?" He thought about it. About how most relationships fell apart when things got easy. How people needed drama, needed chaos, needed something to blame when they got bored. "We keep writing," he said. "Keep knocking on doors. Keep telling each other the truth. That's simple. That's simple." And it was. Not easy. Nothing with him was easy, but simple. The ritual continued. He knocked. She opened. They wrote and read and drank and talked. Some nights were good. Some nights were hard. Some nights they fought about comma placement or the ending of a story or whether something was honest or just cruel. But they always came back to the table, to the typewriter, to the truth. Years later, when people asked how they met, they'd both tell different versions of the same story. He'd say he needed a typewriter. She'd say she needed honest criticism. Both versions were true, but the real truth was simpler. They'd both needed someone who understood that writing wasn't a hobby or a career. It was a way of being in the world. And finding someone else who understood that, who didn't ask you to be smaller or quieter or less obsessed, was rarer than any published story or critical praise. The borrowed typewriter never went back. It stayed on her desk, then their desk when they eventually moved in together for real. His IBM collected dust in a closet until they finally gave it away. "Should have just borrowed the damn thing in the first place," he said once. "Should have," she agreed. "But then we wouldn't have had a story." "No, we wouldn't have." And that was the thing about stories. The good ones, the true ones, they didn't happen because people made smart choices. They happened because people made necessary ones. Because something broke at 2:47 a.m. and there was only one door to knock on. Because sometimes you borrowed a typewriter and ended up borrowing a life. Not a perfect life. Not an easy one. But an honest one. And for two writers who'd spent their whole lives trying to find the truth, that was everything. So one last time. Where are you listening from? And what's your rating? 0 to 10. Did this story land or did it miss the mark? I need to know, because that's the ritual too. Putting something out there and waiting to see if it's honest enough to matter. Thanks for staying until the end. See you in the next one.